Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a situation that is so universally frustrating, it honestly deserves its own warning label. I'm talking about the family kitchen table. Or, maybe for you it's that incredibly exhausting family group chat. Now imagine a guy named Ben. Ben is sitting at the table, and he finally decides to set a really simple, reasonable boundary. Maybe he says he can't make it to a family gathering, or he politely asks someone to stop making a specific, hurtful joke. He's absolutely not trying to start a fight, he's just simply asking to be respected. But instead of hearing his boundary and accepting it, the person across the table begins to cross-examine him. The respect he hoped for? Yeah, it's replaced by a full-blown interrogation.
Which brings us to a really critical question. Why do we keep explaining ourselves in these moments? Because what happens to Ben is that his attempt to be understood is met with this invalidating resistance. It takes a quiet, simple conversation and turns it into a literal trial. And if you're an empathic person, someone who naturally values harmony and connection, your nervous system probably has a very familiar, almost automatic response to this tension. You begin fawning. You try to prove your good intentions. You explain and explain and explain, hoping that if they just understand your heart, the tension is going to disappear. But, as you probably know, it rarely does.
I bet you've heard these exact phrases, right? Often delivered with that familiar, stinging tone. What's your real reason? Or, you're just being too sensitive. These specific, toxic questions are perfectly designed to trigger that fawning response. They push you right to the edge, and suddenly you find yourself over-explaining and apologizing for things you never even did, just to make the discomfort go away. You think you're bringing clarity to the situation, but according to behavioral psychology, you're actually bringing fuel to a fire.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core of the problem. It's what experts call an asymmetrical conflict. See, not every conversation is aiming for understanding. Ben is trying to build a bridge. He's playing the game of connection, right? Using logic, love, and explanation. But the high-conflict person on the other side, they are playing a completely different game, the game of control. They are looking for validation, emotional supply, or simply the satisfaction of being right. You literally cannot win a game of connection when the other person is playing for control. It's like trying to play chess while the other person is playing dodgeball. Every vulnerable detail Ben shares just becomes another place for them to apply pressure.
So, what's the fix? Well, we need a totally new operating system. And the foundation of this system is detachment. Now, in behavioral psychology, this doesn't mean being cold or mean. It just means you stop feeding this asymmetrical conflict with your emotional energy. High-conflict personalities run on supply. Your anger, your tears, your incredibly long, exhausted text messages. It's kind of like Pavlov's dog, They poke you, you react, and they get a reward that reinforces their control. Detachment is the absolutely crucial first step to prevent your bridge of connection from turning into a courtroom of control.
To actually achieve this detachment, we are going to install what I like to call a cognitive firewall. It's called the J.A.D.E protocol. Do not justify, do not argue, do not defend, do not explain. When Ben's boundary is challenged, his very first instinct is to clarify. But with a high-conflict person, explanations aren't clarity, they are ammunition. If Ben says, "I can't come because I'm tired from a double shift," he just unintentionally negotiated his boundary and handed them two brand new things to attack, his work schedule and his intentions. J.A.D. simply stops you from handing over that ammunition.
But people always ask me, okay, well, if I'm not explaining myself, what do I actually say? That is exactly where this incredible framework comes in. Developed by J.A.D.E of the High Conflict Institute, it's called B.I.F.F. Your communication must be brief, informative, friendly, and firm. This is the exact method Ben needs to respond with, calm confidence. It gives you a way to communicate without over-explaining, without being rude, and definitely without improvising when your emotions are running super high.
Let's look at a real-world example of how this plays out. Imagine Ben gets this manipulative text message late at night. "I can't believe you're skipping Sunday dinner again. You're so selfish." Now, the old version of Ben, the one caught in the fawning response, would immediately start typing out a 10-paragraph emotionally charged defense. We've all been there for sure. He'd apologize, he'd justify his whole exhausting week, desperately trying to make everyone feel better and prove he isn't selfish. But let's look at Ben's new B.I.F.F-style response. He just writes, "Hi, I won't be able to make it this Sunday. I hope everyone has a great time." Boom. Notice what is missing here. There is zero debate. There's no emotional defense. He is informative about his boundary, he is friendly with his greeting, and he is firm. He politely closes the door on the drama without surrendering his boundary or inviting any further cross-examination. It's honestly a game changer.
Depending on the situation, you can actually pair B.I.F.F with two other really powerful techniques. The first is the gray rock method, a term coined by the blogger Skylar. This is total emotional disengagement. You basically become as boring as a gray rock to cut off their dopamine loop and starve the conversation of oxygen. But if you're dealing with a co-parent or maybe a boss, being completely cold can sometimes be weaponized against you. That's where the yellow rock method comes in. Developed by Tina Swithin, it's essentially gray rock, but with a layer of polite, professional, social camouflage. You respond only to facts and logistics, looking perfectly reasonable to any outside observer, while energetically giving the high-conflict person absolutely nothing.
But what if you can't just walk away? What if this is a close family member? Using these tools can feel really harsh on your own heart. This requires an internal cognitive shift known as compassionate detachment. Look at the shift in thinking we're talking about here. You move from the brain's emotional reacting center, where you're asking, why are they doing this to me, to your logical, analytical brain, asking, what must it feel like to be trapped inside a mind that needs this much control? You are stepping right out of the victim role and observing their behavior analytically.
To maintain this compassionate detachment, I want you to visualize a glass wall between you and them. You can see them, you can hear them, but their emotional energy hits the glass and slides right down. It protects Ben's nervous system, and even more importantly, it stops the empath's savior reflex. The glass wall reminds you that you are looking at a system with broken circuitry. You simply cannot fix a psychological hardware problem with your empathy. Compassion doesn't require abandoning your boundaries, it requires protecting them.
Now, before you run off and implement these tools, I have to give you a really critical warning. The toxic behavior, it isn't going to stop immediately. In fact, it's going to get worse. Clinicians call this an extinction burst. Think of it like a vending machine. If you put your money in and no soda comes out, you don't just smile and walk away, right? You push the button harder. You shake the machine. When you stop giving a high-conflict person their usual emotional reward, they are going to violently shake the machine to get a reaction.
An extinction burst follows a highly predictable cycle. First, you set the boundary. Then they escalate their toxic behavior. Next, you hold the line. And eventually, the behavior fades into peace. Now that third step, that is the most crucial part of the whole shebang. Because if you break your J.A.D.E firewall and react during the toxic escalation phase, you teach them a very dangerous lesson. You basically teach them that they just need to shake you harder next time to break your boundaries. You absolutely must hold the line.
And while you are holding that line, you need to protect your reality. The most dangerous weapon a toxic personality has is gaslighting, rewriting history until you start to doubt your own sanity. To combat this, you need an external anchor. You need to become a documentarian. Take just 60 seconds right after an interaction to create a factual log, not a diary of your feelings, but hard facts, the date, the time, and the exact quotes. That way, when they later say, I never said that, you don't have to doubt your memory, you just look at your log.
Finally, for those of you who are highly empathetic, the super sensors, you have one more built-in tool: somatic validation. Gaslighting works because manipulators can sound incredibly convincing. They might use a super sweet voice or claim they're just trying to help. But your nervous system, it detects the hidden predatory intent. If their voice is sweet but your chest is tight, your stomach is in knots, or you feel a sudden drop of exhaustion, trust your body. Always prioritize what you feel over what you hear.
Look, dealing with a high-conflict person isn't about winning the argument. Honestly, you will never win the argument. It's about reclaiming the space in your head that they've occupied for far too long. So the final question I want to leave you with today is this. Are you ready to stop trying to win, detach from their distorted realities, and finally implement your defense protocol? Because protecting your peace, stopping the fawning, and standing firm in your boundaries is quite literally the most empowering choice you can make today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to start building your glass wall right now.